Hi, this is Ron Darling.
This is Skip Lockwood.
Hi, I'm Ron Swoboda of the 69 New York Mets, and you're listening to MetsMusings with Gary Mack.
Now it's time for some New York Mets baseball talk. Here's Gary Mack bringing you the latest news and analysis from Mets Nation and the world of baseball on another edition of MetsMusings.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of MetsMusings. I wish it could be a happier start to this edition of the show, but it's not gonna be. Injury bug is biting the New York Mets and hitting him in a vulnerable spot, and that spot, of course, being the pitching rotation. Sean Manaea has a right oblique strain and will miss opening day. His injury comes a week after Frankie Montas, as we reported last week, suffered a high-grade right lat strain that will keep him sidelined at least until mid-May. Manaea will not throw for the next 2 or 3 weeks, after which he will restart the spring progression. He's unlikely to return before mid to late April. So now Sean Manaea, the new acquisition that pitched so well last year, was so durable, is injured and will not start the season. Now, should we panic? I wouldn't panic just yet. The Mets look like they're going to try to fill a spot internally. And let's face it, it's time for Blackburn or and McGill and or Canning and or Krasnick, whoever's left in the starting rotation, to step up. Maybe even a Sproat, a Tidwell, a Hamill, one of these kids to make their mark. This is an opportunity for them. The door is wide open for those 6 pitchers that I just mentioned to kick it in and to run through it. So we'll see what goes on with that. It just made training camp a lot more interesting, in that this competition will be something to see. Who can stick and who can provide the innings that the Mets are going to need. Now, while it is bad news, not good news, there is a silver lining to this. You know, it could help them in the long run, because they will be a little bit more rested, not starting the season, and perhaps that could help. They'll stay fresher towards the end of the season. Also, the fact that we may discover some new talent out of all of this, and that's what you hope for. So don't panic yet. Keep your hands on the wheel. Don't drive off the cliff. It's not the end of the world. And there's always the possibility of signing. There are still some pitchers out there available. And a trade is a possibility. They could reignite, if San Diego's interested, the trade for Dylan Cease. There was a report that Sandy Alcantara possibly could be available. So we'll see if anything happens in that direction. Signings-wise, unless Jose Quintana signed, he's still available. Noah Syndergaard, if you really want to stretch it and take a shot, he's out there. So there are possibilities available to the Mets if they wish to take them. But it seems as if they're going to try to stick internally for this one and just take care of it that way. And I can't say that I blame them. It's not a it's a good chance for somebody else to try to step forward and make their mark on this team. Okay, in other injury news, the newly signed this offseason, Nick Madrigal, he has a fractured shoulder. He was making a play in a game, in a spring training game, fell on his left shoulder. He was given an MRI, and the MRI has shown a fracture. And in the words of Carlos Mendoza, Mets manager, he'll be gone a long time. So this opens up another spot for a utility man. He was the favorite to win that utility spot because he played some shortstop. The Mets don't have a pure shortstop to back up Lindor, as it were. Acuna has played shortstop. He has played second. He has played some third. So he would be a candidate to watch for this. However, the feeling in Mets camp is that the Mets would like to send him out for a little bit more seasoning at AAA. As you recall, he came up last year to replace Lindor, did a fantastic job, but they feel he could use a little bit more seasoning, and I think more offensively than anything, at AAA. So they're not against keeping him, but it's just that this would be their wish if they could do that. Donovan Walton will probably be the guy they look at most to refill that role, though he hasn't played that much shortstop. So we'll have to see with him. Now, the interesting thing is that Brett Baty has taken some ground balls at short and may continue to work there. He has played second and third in the minors. So if the Mets feel he can handle short, he could actually become the utility guy. Keep in mind, he's also played some outfield in the minor leagues, corner outfield, albeit that, but he has played it. So that makes him more versatile, and if he's smart, the more versatile he can get, the better shot he has of making this team, especially at this point with Madrigal going down. So the Mets are not in a world of hurt right now, but they're not in the best position either with these two injuries. It just throws a monkey wrench in the plans, and of course it's more of a nuisance with the pitching staff than the utility infielder. I think there's enough guys to cover that position, and you can always get someone here fairly quickly. So you're really trying to, if Acuna is in AAA and God forbid anything happens to Lindor, and Baty had made the team, I'm sure he could play short for a day or two until you could bring Acuna here, who's more of a natural short, or is playing more shortstop. Then if you're not confident that Baty could handle it over a long period of time. So there are options. Not so worried too much about that. Ronnie Mauricio's coming back too. He played a lot of shortstop and third and second, but he's way behind. He's a couple of weeks behind everybody, so I wouldn't look to consider him making the team either, especially in a utility role. So my guess it's going to be Donovan Walton, but if Baty hits in spring training, it really could be him. And if he hits, it opens up an interesting possibility for him. He could make the team coming north, and interesting, he could play second, he could play third, and like I said, they could throw him in a game early in the season at shortstop and see how he performs. So it's all he's even played some first base, I think, so he would truly be pretty versatile for this team. Now what he should do is learn how to be a third string catcher, and he'd really have a good shot. Maybe that'll be next year if he's still with the Mets. All right, we're going to take a quick break and come back, and I have a great interview with the author Len Ferman. He calls himself the sports time traveler, and he's got a terrific book out on the 1973 Mets, and we're going to hear part one of that interview this week and part two next week. So sit back and enjoy the interview with author Len Ferman. And I'm joined this week by the author of a great new book called The 1973 Mets. You gotta believe, Mr. Len Ferman. Len, welcome to Mets Musings.
Well, thank you so much. It's a real honor to be here on Mets Musings today and especially get to talk about my favorite subject, the 1973 Mets.
Len, why the 73 Mets? How did that come about?
Well, I was 9 years old in the summer of 73. I turned 10 before the World Series. And that was really the foundational experience of my youth. I was a huge Mets fan. I became a Mets fan when my dad took me to my first baseball game, which was at Shea Stadium in the summer of 1970. And I was instantly hooked as a Mets fan. And then I shortly found out that I had become a Mets fan 1 year too late and missed the miracle of 69. But then in 1973, when the Mets made this miraculous run and got to the World Series, I kind of felt, well, now I'm getting to experience a little bit about what they experienced in 1969, except for the fact that we lost Game 7.
Yes.
And in our winner take all society, when you lose the championship, it doesn't matter if you lose it in 4 games or 7 games, you're relegated to very much second class status and pretty much forgotten. And it amazes me how many Mets fans I talk to that are my age and they don't remember what happened in 1973. And I'm like, really? You don't remember? It was incredible. We went from last place to first place in the final month of the season. And so I really felt that this story needs to be told and that all Mets fans need to know this story. One thing that really struck me in my research, and all my research was based on newspaper archives. I did get to talk to a couple of players on the Oakland A's. We can talk about that a little later. But
Mm-hmm.
I found a quote by Cleon Jones, who was the Mets starting left fielder in both 69 and 73. And in late September 1973, when it was still in doubt whether they were going to win the division, but they had come from way back and they were contending, Cleon Jones actually said, if we win it this year, this is going to be bigger than 69 because in 69 we were doing well all season, but that whole summer of 73, the Mets were in the cellar. The Mets were in last place until the final day of August. And that's what made it so magical, such a magical experience to live through. And I needed to relive it and to share it with others. And that's why I did the research and wrote this book.
And it was really kind of a wacky year when you threw out baseball, or at least through the NL East. I mean, that was the old NL East when Pittsburgh was dominating, and yet they didn't have that terrific a year either. I mean, really. Like you said, the Mets came from last to first and won it with a game over 500. It's interesting that you said, though, a lot of people your age don't remember that season. I have to admit, I'm a little older than you because I do remember this. I was 16 in 69, so that was my team, you might say. And 73, I was in college, so There's not a lot remember. There's a couple of years there, if you know what I mean. But it was kind of a wacky season. And I remember going back to college, and they made this run. And I went to school in Pennsylvania, and we didn't get a lot of. I was up in the mountains in a small college, and we didn't get a lot of news. But I remember getting it once in a while, and I'm saying, "Geez, they're winning, they're winning, they're winning, they're moving up the standings." And then when they won the division, it was pretty hard to believe. And then, of course, the heartbreak of the World Series. But it was an interesting team. And as you say, a lot of people just don't talk about it much. We had the 50th anniversary, and it was hardly anything.
It really is a shame because it was such a fascinating season. One of the things that was fascinating was that it was the final year of Willie Mays. And
Hmm.
I feel like that also has kind of gotten lost. And there's been a very sad and strange narrative that Willie Mays shouldn't have even played that year, that he should have hung it up. And he became almost the poster child for a long time of the superstar athlete who doesn't know when to quit. And I take great offense to that because I loved seeing Willie Mays play. I remember when the Mets got Willie Mays in 1972, I couldn't believe it because we were a team, and my whole identity was wrapped up in the Mets. We were a team that our leading home run hitter the year before in 1971 had hit 14 home runs. And that was it. We didn't have any big hitters. And even though we knew Willie Mays wasn't going to play like the Willie Mays of old, just the idea that we had at the time the second leading home run hitter in history.
Yeah.
He was shortly passed by Hank Aaron. Just the idea that we had him on our team and he was wearing our uniform. I remember when the baseball cards came out in 1972, he was still wearing a San Francisco Giants uniform in the baseball cards because he wasn't traded to the Mets until May of 72. And it was such a
Right.
long wait to 73 to finally see Willie Mays on a baseball card in a Mets uniform. So, they had Willie Mays. Of course, we had Tom Terrific, the franchise, and Seaver, in many ways, it may have been his best year. He won the Cy Young that year, but it seems to me, when you look at his statistics, they were good, but they don't look stellar. But what I think a lot of people don't realize, in fact, I didn't realize until I was doing the research, was late in the season, very late in the season, like end of August or early September, his ERA was at 1.70. He was stellar, and he lost a whole bunch of 1-0 and 2-0 games because this was a Mets team that was just terrible at hitting. They had the vaunted pitching staff, Seaver, Kuzma, Matlack, McGraw, but terrible hitting. And Seaver lost so many heartbreak games. He would have won 25 games easily if he had played for another team. So you had Willie Mays, you had Tom Seaver, you had the manager was Yogi Berra. So Yogi's been is an iconic character that transcends baseball. People who've never watched a baseball game have heard Yogiisms. So it really was a fascinating team, and it's just surprising. And they did such unbelievable magical, mystical things going from last to first and knocking off the big red machine in the National League Championship Series when they were really at their height, and then taking the A's, the defending World Series champions, to Game 7. It really is quite astonishing that this team has not gotten more publicity through the years. And my book was really the first book to just solely focus
Yeah.
on the 73 Mets. There's now been a second book by Mark Rosenman.
Hmm.
Um, he calls it The Forgotten Miracle, and it's a really great title because it really is the forgotten miracle. So now at least there's two books about the 1973 Mets.
Yeah, it is. It is really a strange phenomenon, and I guess you might say there's nothing. We're celebrating the 25th anniversary of the 2000 team, and nobody talks about that. You know, as well. You don't see nothing about it, and it's kind of a shame. Um, but I guess that's the way it goes when you lose. The winning you remember, the losing team you don't so much. Now, in your approach to this book and your research, how did you go about that? And anything that you found that was, any fact or anything that was new to you from what you remember?
So what I do is I actually write a sports history newsletter on Substack called The Sports Time Traveler. And the
Hmm.
premise is that I go back in time virtually through newspaper archives to experience great sporting events and great athletes and teams as though I was really there. So what I did in the spirit of the Sports Time Traveler, what I did to follow the 1973 Mets was I went back and I did all the research in 2023. I went back 50 years, and every day I read the newspapers once a day, just like you would have if you had lived in 1973. So if it was
Hmm.
February 19th, 2023, I was reading the February 19th, 1973 newspapers. And here's my cardinal rule of sports time travel. You can never look ahead. So I never looked at, if it was February 19th, I did not look at the February 20th or February 21st newspaper. I systematically read one day at a time. And when you do that, it's a very interesting experience because it really you're mimicking the cadence of real life and you're experiencing things at the same pace you would have when you were there. And one of the things that occurred to me when I came up with this whole concept of sports time travel to try to experience long ago sporting events, some of which I remember, like the Mets, some of which I never knew about at all, and I wanted to learn about for the first time. One of the key things that I've learned is that you you find out about things and you pick up things that maybe you never knew about, and maybe people at the time didn't realize either, because I'm not just reading one newspaper. I'm reading multiple newspapers, and like if the Mets played the Reds on a particular day, I'm also reading the newspaper archives for the Cincinnati Enquirer and getting their
Huh?
perspective. And so very often I'm piecing together things that nobody at the time knew about, because if you think about it, back then it was if you're in the New York area back then, you couldn't just pick up the Cincinnati Enquirer. You had to be in Cincinnati to read the Cincinnati Enquirer. We
Right,
didn't have the
right.
internet. These newspapers weren't available, except in their own cities. So that's one really interesting thing about the experience and things I was able to learn along the way that people maybe didn't even know about at the time. And so I've come across a whole bunch of things that just really astonished me. One of my favorites is a chapter in the middle of the book, which I call uh, New York never saw this. It's about a two-game series in Atlanta on July 16th and July 17th, 1973. It was very interesting because it was the last time that Willie Mays and Hank Aaron both started in a regular season game.
Wow.
And I thought that made it special. And Roger Maris was at the game on July 16th because Aaron at the time was chasing Babe Ruth's all-time home run record. And Maris was the only other man alive who knew what it's like to chase a Babe Ruth home run record. Maris had set the single season record just 12 years earlier in 61. So you've got you have Mays, Aaron, and Maris all in the same building. And the interesting thing about it was several interesting things. First, the July 16th game was on a Monday night. And at that time, NBC had a contract with the Major League Baseball to televise the Monday night game of the week. And if a particular game was not the Monday night game of the week, it was not allowed to be on television. So the Mets and Braves game, the Braves were in fifth place, the Mets were in sixth place in their divisions. This was not a very exciting game. The Monday night game of the week was between San Francisco and St. Louis. So that game was on national television. This game in Atlanta is not televised, so nobody in New York gets to see the game. And in Atlanta, there was only 7,000 fans in the stadium, so very few people got to see this game. And what they missed was something truly astonishing based all we have is the descriptions from the sports writers. In the third inning of the July 16th game, Marty Perez, a light hitting shortstop, was at the plate for Atlanta. Willie Mays was playing center field, and he must have been playing a shallow center field because Perez is a light hitter, and Mays his his mode of operating was to play a shallow center field because he had such speed. And so Perez apparently hits a ball, high fly ball to straightaway, deep straightaway center field. So Mays, according to all the descriptions by several reporters from New York and Atlanta, he turned around back to his plate and races towards the center field fence. And to all these sports writers, it looks like a rerun of the 1954 World Series, Mays's famous the catch in the
Yeah.
54 World Series. So he's racing to catch the ball, but there's one big problem. He's not on the Polo Grounds.
Yeah.
Polo Grounds had an endless center field. It was almost 500 feet. So he was able to race back and make that catch off of Vic Wertz in the 1954 World Series. This time he doesn't have that kind of room. Atlanta had a wire mesh fence at precisely 400 feet, and Mays runs smack into
Oh,
the wire mesh fence. Uh, Just before he hit the fence, he caught the ball. And when he hits the fence, he is knocked back onto his back and he drops the ball, and the umpires say it's not an out. And he's laying, and Perez rounds the bases and has an inside the park home run, one of the few home runs of his whole career. And Mays is just flat on his back. And all the players rush out, and the trainer comes out, and he gets up, and after a few minutes, he gets up and he says, "I'm okay," and he keeps playing. He comes to bat in the bottom of the inning, and he gets a double. And then later in the game, he gets a single. He goes 2 for 4. Now the Mets lose, but here Mays he, arguably makes one of the greatest catches of his career, although the umpire said he didn't have it long enough.
yeah.
And then goes 2 for 4. Now the next day, he doesn't start the game because he's he's feeling the effects now, having run head first into the fence. So he doesn't start the game. The Mets are down 7-1 in the top of the ninth, and they make a truly historic comeback. They make it all the way back to 7-6. But now there's 2 outs. So it's 2 outs, top of the ninth. They have 2 runners on base. And Wayne Garrett is the Mets starting third baseman, is coming to the plate. Now, Garrett's a lefty, and the Braves had a right-handed pitcher, so they bring in a lefty relief pitcher. And Yogi Berra, with lefty on lefty, decides he's going to pinch hit for Garrett, and he brings in Willie Mays. So banged up Willie Mays comes in, 2 outs, down a run, two runners on base. He gets to a 2-strike count, and the next pitch he nails it into right center field, and both runners score, and the Mets win that game 8-7. So, and one of the interesting things is this narrative that Mays was washed up. You look at his statistics don't look great, but he
Hmm.
won several games for them. He won that game for them. And one of the reasons his stats look so bad in 73 was he got off to a really horrific start in the cold weather. And he played that whole year, he played injured, and he kept injuring himself
Right.
along the way, like
Right.
running into the fence.
Hmm.
And but in mid-June, he had a real resurgence, and he was batting over 300 for a month stretch when he won that game in late July. Now the reason I bring this story up, I just want to keep going for a minute, is after I finished writing the book and I'm rereading my own book, I come across that story again about how Berra had pinch hit for Wayne Garrett to bring up Willie Mays, and Willie Mays wins the game. Now let's flash forward to 3 months to October 21st, 1973. It's game 7 of the World Series. The Mets are down 5-2 with 2 outs in the top of the ninth inning, but they have 2 runners on base. So a home run ties the game. And who's the next batter coming up with 2 outs? Wayne Garrett. And the pitcher on the mound for Oakland is a left-handed pitcher, Darrell Knowles. So lefty on lefty is not optimal. Now, if you bring in a right-handed pitcher, a right-handed batter, the A's are not likely to take Knowles out because he's one of their they had two great relief pitchers. They had Knowles and they had Raleigh Fingers, who was a righty. But Fingers has already pitched. So it's very unlikely that A's manager Dick Williams is going to take Knowles out of the game just because you bring a right-handed batter up. But what does Yogi Berra do? He's got Willie Mays on the bench available, and he lets Garrett hit. So why? And so this was what I pieced back together again. That it really stunned me. Why, when he saw what happened on July 17th, 1973, when he pinch hit Mays for Garrett and Mays wins the game, why didn't he pinch hit Mays for Garrett when Mays would have been going up against a left-handed pitcher? And by the way, hey, maybe he was 42 years old, but he was still the third all-time leading home run hitter at that point in time. Why not give Willie Mays one more chance? And what happened was Garrett popped up, and that's the end of the World Series.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of questions about things that Yogi did in that World Series, as you well know. Uh, One of the big ones is the starter in Game 6, and I know I've talked to a couple of guys, Ed Kranepool in particular, the late Ed Kranepool, and he firmly believed that George Stone should have started that game, that they would have won had George Stone started it. But, hindsight's 2020, but he was there, so I have to go with what he says. Same thing with the late Buddy Harrelson and a couple of the other guys. But Yogi did not have the best World Series, but it was tough. As you said, they weren't really expected to do anything coming off of the 71 to 72 season. And I think part of that too was the loss of Gil Hodges. That team was in shock, I think, for a number of years. I think the whole organization, I think, was just shocked.
Absolutely. Losing Gil Hodges was, obviously a tragedy. And it was also a terrible blow for the organization. Very interesting though. Hodges passed away right at the end of spring training in 1972.
Hmm.
The Mets actually had the best start in the entire franchise history, better than even the '86 team in 1972. They started that season 25-7. They've never had a start like that ever. In fact, they set the franchise record, which remains the franchise record winning streak. Would you believe in our, what is it, 64 years of New York
Yeah,
Mets?
yeah.
The franchise winning streak is 11 games. That's the most we've ever won. It's been tied several times.
Hmm.
And one of the times was in that 63, I think it was
Oh.
first set in 69, and the 73 team tied it. I believe the 2015 team also tied it. So they won 11 straight games. One of the interesting things about that 11 game streak that the Mets were 14-7, and then they won 11 to get to 25-7. Uh, that streak started the first day that Willie Mays was officially a Met. So his first 11 games were an 11 game winning streak. He didn't play in all 11 of those games, but that's kind of an interesting fact. But then they slipped in 72. They slipped into a terrible melees, and in July of that year, July of 72, the whole month they scored, I believe it's 57 runs in 25 games. 57 runs. I mean, they were averaging just a little over 2 runs a game. That's how awful the hitting was in 72. But a lot of that was injuries, and a lot of the reason the team was in last place in 73 was a lot of injuries. Bud Harrelson missed most of the summer. Cleon Jones missed most of the summer.
Hmm.
Uh, Mays played hurt the entire year. People don't give him enough credit because he played hurt the entire year. Rusty Staub missed half of 72, and then he played most of 73, but he played hurt almost the whole year as well. So they were very banged up. And one of the things that did help was most of the players were back when they went on that run in September of 73. Jones was back, Harrelson was back, Brody had missed a lot of time. He was back. So that really helped.
And then Rusty got hurt. I think was it in the first game of the World Series or was it the playoffs?
Yeah, he got hurt in the playoffs when he ran into the fence, making a spectacular catch. And the
Right,
only way to make the catch was to run smack into the fence. And that wasn't the wire mesh fence like we were talking about. The Jay Stadium fence was a hard, I don't know what kind of material
wooden.
it
I
was, but
think it
it was
was
a
at that.
yeah, it was a hard fence. And
Yeah,
so yeah, he got hurt very badly. I think he missed a game in the playoffs. They still won without him. And I found an interesting story about how after game two of the World Series, his shoulder was still terrible.
hmm,
And in fact, in game one, one of the reasons they lost game one was because Staub was playing and he couldn't throw the ball. He's
right.
playing outfield, but he couldn't throw the ball. So a ball
He,
gets hit to the outfield, and he has to make like Felix Mion, the second baseman, has to run way out, and Staub has to do like a little underhanded flip to
right.
Mion, and that cost them a run. A run came around to score, whereas a normal right fielder would have held the runner or thrown them out at the plate, and they only lost that game 2-1. But after game two, I found this really interesting story about how Staub didn't fly back to New York. The opening two games were in Oakland, then they're going back to New York. Staub did not fly with the team from Oakland to New York. He flew with the press, who were leaving on a red eye flight right after the game because he wanted to get back to get extra batting practice because he knew there was no way he could do anything in game three unless he figured out how to swing the bat given the very sad state of his shoulder.
Hmm.
And that really worked because he had a spectacular set of
Yeah,
games.
yeah. He
In
had a great
New York.
series, right? Yeah,
Yeah, he batted over
offensively.
400 in the series. Yeah.
It's funny that you said about the underhand throw because I was watching a video just yesterday, and it was I think game six, and there was a base hit to right field, and he came in, and he had to throw the ball underhand, and those that remember that he did hurt his shoulder badly and had to do that. Yet he could hit. He, as you said, he figured out a way to hit. I'm just surprised, and it's just a question that popped in my mind: why they never moved him to first base in that series? He played first base off and on, so you would think that perhaps
Now that's very interesting because Milner was the first baseman, and
right.
Milner had been an outfielder, so it's not like Milner couldn't play outfield. Milner had played outfield in his rookie season, and then they
Hmm.
moved him to first base. So that's a really good question that I had not pondered before, why they didn't do that. And another interesting thing was 1973 was actually the first year of the designated hitter in the American League, but it was decided that there would be no designated hitter in the World Series for any of the seven games. So that in some ways that also hurt the Mets because Staub could have been the
He could have.
designated hitter.
Yeah, yeah, and taking him off of the field, but um, it was something to see a guy out there throwing underhand. Nowadays, you wouldn't see it because they just replace these guys so much that you wouldn't think you'd see him at all. Um, Now, as you said, this team came from last place to first place, and they really showed a lot of resilience in their season. Was there a key turning point that you discovered, or that you feel uh, was the thing that turned it? A lot of people say it was the meeting in the clubhouse with the "You Gotta Believe" and the M. Donald Grant speech. What's your thoughts on what could have been the turning point in the whole thing?
So it wasn't the meeting in the clubhouse because that meeting took place around the end of July, and they still had another month where they were just going nowhere. What I think the turning point was in late August. They came home from a long road trip, and they had to play the Dodgers, Reds, and Giants, which those three teams that were all in the NL West, they were the three best teams in the National League. And they played them very tight. They they split the series with the Reds, and but they saw how they could have won all four games easily, and I think that got them going. And one of the things that made the big difference was, you talked about the meeting in the clubhouse where Tug McGraw famously starts chanting, "You gotta believe," and Grant thinks that McGraw is mocking him because Grant's trying to make this serious speech, and then I'm getting this all secondhand. I obviously wasn't there, but
Yeah.
as the story goes, Grant's making a serious speech, and all of a sudden Tug McGraw just just maniacally starts screaming, "You gotta believe!" And Grant thinks he's mocking him, but what Tug McGraw was doing was he was just channeling what a mental coach had told him, "You've got to believe in yourself." And so McGraw, you know, channeled that into starting to shout, "You got to believe." But he's still for the next several weeks after that, McGraw was not pitching well. The team was up and down. But in late August, when they played those top teams, McGraw started really getting locked in, and he started pitching unbelievably. And in the final stretch of the season, the last 33 games, the Mets went 24-9. So they really put it together. And Tug won or saved almost every single one of those games. He had an unbelievable stretch where they could just, if you can look it up in Baseball Reference, his ERA the last month of the season was 0 point something. So he really turned. He had an ERA in July of over 6. So he really turned things around, and that was one of the keys. The other key was getting a lot of players back. They got Harrelson back, Grody back. I mentioned this before. Harrelson, Grody, Jones, all of them had been out, and now they're back. And so they won a few games and they got a little momentum. And I'll tell you, one of the other things I read that showed me the value of Willie Mays in the clubhouse there was that Mays had a quote late in the season, before they started winning, but late in the season, where he said, "Winning is like a virus; it's contagious. If you can just start winning, you can keep winning." And so, it makes me think that Mays must have been saying this kind of stuff to the other players. So I think the clubhouse influence of Mays is also underappreciated. And one thing that really strikes me is you look at the 73 Mets and then look at the 74 Mets. And the one big difference in personnel is no Willie Mays.
Well, no, Willie.
What happens
Yeah.
in 74? The Mets, the bottom falls out. The Mets
Fall down.
finish they
Yeah.
finish, I think, 71-91 in 74. And you still have the whole pitching staff there, but you don't have Willie Mays. So, everybody who says he was done, he was finished, they're overlooking the some of the positive things he did do. Sure, he wasn't hitting 40 home runs. His statistics look terrible, but he did win several games like the one I pointed out, and he had a positive clubhouse influence. There's just no doubt about it. And then some of the other intangible things he did, and he created what I think is one of the most iconic sports photos in sports history. In game 2 of the 1973 World Series, where he's down on his knees, pleading with the umpire to overturn the call, where Bud Harrelson had been called out at the
Well,
plate
out.
in the top of the 10th inning,
The
and
phantom
Mays,
tag.
yeah, Mays was the on deck hitter. So if you look at the videotape, Mays, as the play is taking shape, Mays comes over to home plate. He's got a better view of the play than the umpire.
The
He
Empire. Yeah.
knows that Ray Fosse missed the tag on Bud Harrelson, but it just, to me, it's so iconic because how many times have you ever seen a player of his stature, somebody who, with all the modern statistics we have, they're now they're now, I've seen people say now, you can make a statistical case that Willie Mays is the greatest baseball player in history. And so in how many sports has somebody of that stature ever lowered themselves to get into that position where you're on your knees, arms up in the air, almost in tears, pleading with the umpire to overturn a call? Mays gave everything he had for that team, and he's just very underappreciated for it.
Certainly is, and he loved being back with the Mets, and of course with Mrs. Payson, and 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 I think that's the importance of your book. It is so important to note this history of the team, and we're losing a lot of these guys. We've lost a home, Cranepool this year, Buddy Harrelson, Jerry Grody's gone now, Willie. It's just Seaver, of course, we lost a few years ago. It's just something that is going on that unfortunately as we get further apart. So I think it's great to have a history of that season, to have these books so we can go back. I always feel like if you're a fan of a team, you should know the history of that team.
Baseball and BBQ, your place for interesting baseball talk, opinions, and history.
Baseball and BBQ, your place for barbecue recipes, tips, and interviews from the world of barbecue. If you like baseball and if you like barbecue, then tune in to Baseball and BBQ. Find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and BaseballTalkRadio.com.
Okay, and we're back, and the Mets did make a move. They acquired outfielder Alexander Canario from the Cubs for cash considerations, the team announced the other day. New York placed Nick Madrigal on the 60-day injured list to create a 40-man roster spot for Canario. Chicago had designated a 24-year-old for assignment last week as a corresponding move for the Justin Turner signing. He is out of options, so he needed to break camp or be made available to other teams via trade or available. He one time was a highly touted prospect. He's still only 24. The Mets are going to take a chance with him, and hopefully that's the kind of thing that'll work out. We will have to wait and see. Odds are is that he will not break camp with the Mets. They're pretty well set already in the outfield with Soto and Taylor and Dorseri in center, Nimmo in left, and then they have Marte and Winker and some of the other guys. If Baty makes a team, he's had some outfield experience, limited, but still outfield experience. So it's going to be difficult for him to make the team, but the thoughts are that the possibility exists that the Mets would try to get him through waivers at the end of the regular season, at the end of spring training, excuse me. So that's another thing we'll have to watch. Brett Baty walked out of the clubhouse the other day, and not too bad. Be a nice person, and good things will come to you. He walked out of the clubhouse and found a brand new SUV parked for him in the player's lot. Juan Soto purchased it as thanks for Baty giving up his uniform number 22. Soto said that he really appreciates the number and it's the first one he ever wore, and he's worn it throughout his whole 7-year major league career. Baty switched to number 7 shortly after Soto signed, in part because he grew up a fan of Jose Reyes and Joe Mauer. Baty said recently that Soto texted him and the two got everything worked out. Worked out indeed. It got Brett Baty a brand new, spanking, loaded, luxurious SUV. I think it's a Chevy that he got him, a Chevy SUV. The thing's a beauty, as you can see on the video, and not too bad to give up a number. And that's going to do it for this week's show. I hope you all have a great week coming up, and pay attention to the spring training games, and please hit that like and subscribe button. And don't forget, we are on all of your podcast apps. You name it, we're on it. So go check us out and tell your family and friends about Mets Musings, and your parents and your grandparents, whoever are Met fans in your house, tell them about Mets Musings. And don't forget, till we meet again, to keep the faith, stay optimistic, and let's go Mets. And I'm Gary Mack, and I'll see you next time on another edition of Mets Musings.